Hi, I'm Jess Engelking from Soundings Fine Audio in Denver, Colorado, and today we're going to be exploring turntables. So today we're going to talk about why people still love turntables, why people would listen to analog at all, and we'll go over some of the differences in turntables, some of the anatomy of turntables, how to set up some of the basic things. It's not going to be a deep dive, but we'll talk about the basic parts and why you might spend a little more on one turntable over another. So the anatomy of a turntable, we can break it down into a few core components that virtually every turntable has on some level. There's going to be some variation to this, but by and large, this is what they all consist of. So starting from the ground up, we're going to have the plinth, which is the rectangular thing that most people think of when they're visualizing a turntable. That's where all of these other components generally are going to be built into, or at least the other components will be nearby. The material of that plinth can vary to all kinds of stuff. It could be something as simple as a piece of MDF wood. It could be an exotic, beautiful wood. It could be carbon fiber. It could be sandwiched aluminum with all kinds of fancy materials, special polymers in there. On top of the plinth, you'll generally have the bearing, which the platter sits on top of. The platter is the portion, the round piece that the record actually sits on. It will balance on the bearing and spin smoothly, hopefully, through the system. And then you'll have a motor that will be attached to that. That motor will either be attached through a belt or it will be a direct drive that's attached to the spindle and bearing and drive the motor directly. Next to the platter, you'll have the tone arm itself. The tone arm holds the cartridge and stylus, and those two pieces are what swing over and drop down into the record grooves to actually read those sound waves that are ground into the record and eventually end up as sound out of your speakers. The tone arm, just like the platter and just like the plinth, can be made out of all kinds of different materials. It can be a simple aluminum tube. It could be something more exotic like carbon fiber or even way beyond that. The cartridge is a very important piece of the system. All of these pieces are important, but the cartridge is doing the opposite job of what your speaker does. Your speaker takes electricity and turns it into movement, which then goes into sound waves. The cartridge is doing the opposite. It is moving along the record grooves, and that turns into an electrical signal that gets fed into the system. So the cartridge will make up the sound of your turntable as much as your speakers make up the sound of your system. Very important to match up your cartridge with the speakers to get the right sound and the right flavor balance. We'll take a look at a few different turntables that we have on display, and we'll go over these differences and show you some of the options that are out there in the world. So analog versus digital, there are a couple really big differences. So with the digital, you're taking ones and zeros and you're using a mathematical algorithm to recreate all of that sound that was captured with those ones and zeros, the on-off signals. With a piece of vinyl and turntables, they're taking a song or a sound that was directly carved into a piece of vinyl, and it's the cartridge's job to trace that sound signature as faithfully as possible and push that through the system out of your speakers. A turntable's job has a lot of challenges. There's a book out there where they refer to turntables as a vibration measurement machine. And that's a really good way to sum up turntables. The whole idea is if they can control the speed of the spinning vinyl and control the vibration so that all you're getting is that wiggling needle and nothing else, you should have a faithful version of whatever was on that piece of vinyl. All of the components in a turntable are designed to deal with those challenges. There are a couple types of turntables available, way more than a couple, and it depends on what point of view you want to come from. So a lot of the old school turntables, turntables that were available long before streaming was around, were automatic. Not everybody felt comfortable moving the needle and stylus over, so you might hit a button and the arm would magically lift up, move the needle over, and drop it down carefully. There would be all kinds of clockwork mechanisms to make sure that it would be as simple to use as possible. From an audiophile perspective, a manual turntable, something that's missing all of these gears and springs, might be audibly superior. So you have to balance out, do you want the most perfect sound and are you willing to drop the needle manually, or do you need a little bit of help and do you want to just hit a button and have the needle drop? I would say that manual is going to be the superior sound quality wise, but you can still get a lot of what is had to be offered by vinyl if you were to get an automatic or even a semi-automatic variety. The most common varieties of turntables are high mass or heavy turntables, low mass or lightweight turntables, and sprung turntables, which actually sit on a bed of springs to help deal with the vibrations. All of these types of tables have their own trade-offs, as I mentioned before, and we'll explore a few different turntables and show you why you might want to choose one over another. So people will choose their turntable for a lot of reasons. Sound performance is obviously a big deal, but since the turntable will often be out in the open, the looks matter as well. So we'll look at a couple turntables here, and I'll show you some of the features that they have beyond just the sound quality itself. This EAT turntable is one of their entry points, but I feel that this is another great step out of a more basic table. They've addressed vibrations through the feet and through the sandwiched plinth. They have an aluminum platter that has a piece of polymer that goes around the inside of it to help make sure that the aluminum doesn't ring. They have a high quality bearing with adjustable speed control. Underneath, you can just move the belt underneath the platter. Very clean look. Has a carbon fiber tone arm as well that plays well with most cartridges. The look of this table is what draws a lot of people to it. You can feel like you've gotten a much fancier table than some of the more basic variety that are out there. The sound quality matches absolutely. They've got a bunch of different carbon fiber varieties. This is, again, their entry point, but this is a good place to start if you want to upgrade your turntable game. The music hall turntable is another great step out of entry-level tables. While fairly basic looking, it's called the Stealth for a reason, and it is kind of a stealth bomber look. Everything is matte black on it, which has a very cool vibe. The cool thing about this table is it gives you a lot of higher end features. So for example, the tone arm, you'll notice, has a lot of extra knobs and screws. It's a little chunkier than the variety you may be used to seeing. This has what's called an on-the-fly VTA. This allows us to raise the height of the tone arm as needed. So if you look at the front with the removable head shell and you decide to change out multiple cartridges, yes, people do have different cartridges for different types of records, you can actually much more easily adjust for that using this VTA tower at the back. It also has a platter and feet and plinth that's designed to handle vibrations better than your standard entry-level turntable. The next turntable we'll see is the MoFi Ultra Deck Fender Edition. This one is a lot more vibrant. They actually use Fender guitar parts to outfit this table. That gives it a really awesome look in a music room where you might have other guitars and other things out there. This will match perfectly. It actually improves the sound as well. They have the motor off to the side and it's exposed so that you can change the speed more readily. It has a tone arm that's a little simpler in design, but simpler means fewer moving parts, less mass, and they believe that that's going to bring extra sound quality as well. This is a really great turntable. On the underside of it, they've put feet that are designed by HRS. HRS designs very high quality audio racks, and they've teamed up with them to create a system specifically for this turntable. Just another example of how far some of these companies will go to make sure that extra vibrations don't make their way in. This Linn turntable is the entry point for Linn. This is a sprung design. You'll notice that it actually has kind of a bounciness. Don't worry, it only bounces when you're moving the tone arm around. That springiness is designed to actually absorb the vibrations that happen in the air when you're playing music at louder volumes. This has a really big effect on the overall sound quality of the system. Most Linnies, as they're known, will tell you that they have a sound quality all their own. This turntable specifically has been made for over 50 years. One of the reasons it's so popular and why it's been around so long is because they have an awesome upgrade path. So with this turntable, you're not stuck with what they give you. This turntable, you can actually upgrade lots of different components. You can swap out the tone arm, you can adjust the springs, you can add different feet, you can change out the motor. They actually have a long list of upgrades. So you can start out with a basic turntable and really upgrade it to something that is among the best turntables available. Looking at this Fikert turntable, this is a high mass variety. So you can see it's a lot chunkier than a lot of the other tables. They actually sandwich a really high quality piece of wood between two aluminum plates, and then they have it on special feet. All of these things stacked together are what give the Fikert its sound. If you were to put different feet directly underneath the bottom plate, it doesn't sound the same as putting those upgraded feet underneath the Fikert's factory feet. So this is a system, and it's tuned as such. This specific one has multiple motors, an oversized bearing, and even 2 locations for tone arms. So just like you could change out cartridges for your music type, whether that's stereo or mono, whether that's one for your high-end records and one for the flea market records, or whether you have a more specialized cartridge like this SPU cartridge we have installed here, you can basically have everything ready to go and you don't necessarily have to readjust every time you swap it out. We have an oversized platter with some brass inserts that helps with the flywheel effect to make sure that it stays nice and smooth at whichever speed you choose. So setting up a vinyl rig is pretty straightforward. Let's assume you already have your speakers chosen, you already have an amp or preamp or integrated amp, but you just want to add vinyl as a source. You're going to need a few things. You're going to need a turntable with a cartridge. You're going to need a phono preamp, or phono stage, as some people call it online. That takes the itty-bitty signal that's coming off of the cartridge, and that blows it up to the same type of line level output that you might see from a CD player or a streamer. These signals from a cartridge are really small, and they may have to be blown up 10 times or 100 times greater than they are right off of the needle itself. So the phono stage plays a big role in making sure that it's converted properly. There's also an equalizer section inside of that phono stage that's very important. Because bass and treble waves are of a certain size, to get it all to fit on a piece of vinyl, they have to do some magic EQing inside the recording studio to make sure that it'll all fit nicely onto our records. The phono stage helps undo that equalizing so that it will play normally. Instead of just using a phono stage, there's also a device called a step-up transformer. So if you want the fewest amount of electronics, there are special transformers that you can put in between the phono stage and your cartridge that some listeners really prefer sound-wise. There are some other things to consider if you're doing that, but that is an option. You also need some cables. The cable standard for turntables is there kind of is no standard. They'll all have a left and right output, but there are a few ways that you can connect up to it. It can be standard RCA cables, standard XLR. Some tone arms also have what's called a 5-pin DIN connector, which is a smaller barrel connector that goes underneath. Since the wires and signals from the cartridge are so small, sometimes it's easier to feed it into this type of universal connector, universal for turntables at least, to convert it to RCA or convert it to XLR, depending on what your phono stage might want. Then lastly, you may have a ground cable. And I say may have because there isn't actually a standard for grounding in tone arms. Most tone arms will have a ground cable coming off of it, but if yours doesn't have a ground connector, that doesn't mean that it's good or bad. It just means the engineer who designed it didn't think it was necessary. We find that a good grounding cable will lower the noise floor, but in certain scenarios it can induce a hum that can be a real challenge to track down. When it comes to taking care of your turntable, the biggest thing is to keep dust off of everything. Since your needle is going to be dragging through all of the record grooves, making sure that it has a nice clean surface to trace is very important. It's the same as driving your car down a freshly paved road compared to a dirt road. It's just harder on your car if you have all these potholes that it's going through all the time. Your tires are going to wear out faster. Likewise with a cartridge, if it is constantly digging through the mud of whatever used piece of vinyl you found recently, it's going to round off the point of the needle. Over time, it's going to add wear that will ultimately affect the playback. If your needle is dirty, it can also take your brand new piece of vinyl and drag a rock through those grooves. So keeping your records clean using a manual brush, or ideally a record cleaning machine of some type, and then using a simple brush to keep the stylus clean is a really good idea. Different types of cleaning solutions, there's going to be a lot of opinions out there on that. Most of the cartridge manufacturers I talk to would prefer that you do not use some type of wet cleaner. If they do suggest a wet cleaner, a lot of times they have a brand that they recommend specifically. A lot of the different types of adhesives that they use to keep the needle and cantilever and all those parts intact, some of that stuff can be corrosive over time. So the first time you use it, it's not a big deal, but the 100th time you use it, it may start putting wear on the needle itself. Audiophile, for example, will include a little toothbrush-looking thing that you can pull towards you and just get off of the regular dirt and just the crud that kind of builds up over time. There are some good solutions out there. I'm going to be brand agnostic in this video. You can do your own research and see what appeals to you. Bearing maintenance is also something to keep in mind. A lot of bearings underneath the platter are lubricated. Some use fancy pastes, some just use motor oil of a certain weight. You want to ask your dealer, talk to the manufacturer, and see what they recommend. I have probably 3 or 4 different types of lubrication for turntables that we use, depending on what type of turntable comes through the door. A little dab will do you. Some manufacturers have very specific amounts of lubrication that you need to do, as well as intervals. I would say that if you're an average vinyl user, you're listening to a few albums a week, that once a year you take the platter off, clean out the inside of the bearing on both the platter and on the plinth, and then reapply. That'll make sure that your turntable will have years of use ahead of it. When it comes to vibration control, once you have your turntable, you've got a few options. You can put a mat of some sort between the platter and between the record. There are lots of different materials out there. You'll see special polymers and plastics. You'll see special rubbers, special cottons. All kinds of different stuff has been used out there. Carbon fiber discs, heavy brass platters. You want to use the one that will not add too much weight to your bearing. You want to add the one that sounds good to your system. Some of these will add a lot of thickness, in which case it'll change how the needle will apply. So you have to be careful that the sound you hear wasn't because the needle is now in a new position compared to adding a new type of surface for the record to be on. There's all kinds of combinations that you can use. Your ear is the best way to judge what's good for your system. I make recommendations all the time based on the turntable. Some of the turntable manufacturers we have, I've been fortunate enough to talk to the engineers, and they actually recommend not using a platter. Others strongly suggest using some type of platter mat. So talk to your dealer. If you have questions, you can comment below or call our store directly, and I'm happy to give advice. Other vibration control is done through what the turntable is actually sitting on. Some manufacturers employ springs, special polymer feet, all kinds of different stuff that are actually integrated into the turntable. We also sell different types of shelving. So that can be something as complicated as a big fancy component rack, or it might just be a shelf that sits on your regular cabinet. All of these things will have an effect on the sound. Some of them are profound. Some of them are real game changers as far as improving the noise floor, preventing footfall from making your record skip. Others are a little more subtle. Just like everything else, you want it to match your system. You don't want to go overboard on a platform for a very entry-level table. But if you're having vibrational issues and you don't want to replace the table, this is a place that you can start to improve things. So some other reasons why people like the vinyl experience is just that. It's the experience. It's totally different than being on your phone yet again and hunting and pecking and interacting with a screen. This is brings out the collector in me. I actually really like having that physical album. If I lose internet for some reason, I always know that I can go over and pull out my favorite album and play it. You have all of the album art, all the liner notes, all that stuff was chosen by the artist in many cases to help add to the experience of the music, something to read while I'm listening. It also brings on the whole album experience. And what I mean by that is being able to listen to all the songs on side one and then flipping the record and listening to all the songs on side two. We have this culture of singles, and singles have always been around for music as far as favorite songs. But to me, that's kind of like just reading a single chapter out of a book. There's a story to be had from reading a book start to finish. And with a lot of our favorite albums out there, the artist had a story to tell. Listening to an album from start to finish and listening to the purposefulness of the songs being put in a very specific order brings something special to the table. Not to mention just the act of finding that album, pulling it off the shelf, putting it on the record cleaner. It's all very deliberate, and I think that adds to the music experience beyond just the sound, which I do think is better. So vinyl has never really gone away. We've had a little bit of a lull in the early 2000s, but I think that if it's withstood this test of time, I think that it's going to be with us for a while longer. There is just something special about turntables and vinyl. If you haven't experienced it, I really urge you to find a good analog rig, sit down with an album, and experience it like you've never experienced it before. I really appreciate all of the comments, all of the new subscribers. We have more content on its way. I appreciate the feedback. We have more to come on subwoofers, on home theater, and we can even go further into cartridges and turntable setup as well. So again, thank you everybody who has participated with that. As always, like and subscribe at the bottom. We appreciate all of your support. We'll see you next time.